I'm a first-year med student. I'm starting med school in the summer. What do I need to be doing? What do I need to be thinking about starting day one?
We want to see how you did in your rotations. Were you engaged? Did you come early? Did you stay late? Were you a great team leader? Were you somebody who they could count on? Did you do anything that was a little bit more above and beyond? How did you interact with everybody?
But now, again, because students need ways to kind of set themselves apart, additionally, what are some ways that they can do that? What activities can they get involved with?
I think that one of the things that students get very caught up on are the typical things like interest groups and student groups. And they're like, oh, well, I'm the president of the internal medicine student group. And that's wonderful. I think those are great opportunities. But there are so many other great leadership opportunities within your medical school. And one of my favorite things is
This is the Oath podcast presented by Med Edits Medical Admissions. You will learn about all things related to being pre-med, the medical school admissions process, and the residency match. I am your host, Dr. Jessica Freedman. Hello, everybody. Today, we are going to be talking about the residency match. And with step one becoming pass-fail, we are going to be talking about what medical students and what residency applicants need to do to be competitive as medical students for the residency match. I am your host, Dr. Jessica Freedman. I am an emergency physician. I am a former associate residency director at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in the Department of Emergency Medicine. And I am the chair and founder of Med Edits Medical Admissions, which I founded in 2007. And I'd like to introduce my guest today, Sydney Webster. Sydney has been working with Med Edits as one of our professor level advisors since 2018. Sydney's background is she has a master's in advising. Correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong, Sydney, but in advising with a focus on medical education. She then moved on to pre-professional advising at the undergraduate level, and finally was a program coordinator in the Department of Surgery at Baylor School of Medicine before she joined us. And we are just thrilled that she is a member of our squad because she's just terrific, and she's guided our medical students our medical students looking for residency for quite a while. So just to kind of get started, we're just going to talk a little bit about what the residency match is. We realize that not everybody here understands all of that. Some of you may, just have gotten into medical school, and so you're starting to think about the next phase of your education. So just to start, Sydney, can you just tell us a little bit about, very briefly, because it's not the real focus of the episode, but just so we can, create a little bit of background information for people. Tell me, what is the residency match, and, a little bit about the algorithm, and just so people kind of have a baseline understanding of it.
So the residency match is when applicants that want to pursue a certain specialty, so that can be family medicine, it can be orthopedics, it can be whatever you have decided after, your third year of medical school, going into your fourth year of medical school, or if you've already graduated and you're non-traditional, you've decided what specialty you want to apply for. And so you have to then do significant training in that specialty, depending on the specialty, will be depending on the number of years you're going to go. And then you have to apply. And this is a very significant process. It is similar to applying to medical school, but there are other aspects to it that are specific to the residency and specific to the specialty. And so what happens is after you apply, then you are asked for interviews. And after your interviews, you and the programs that you've interviewed at rank you. So there's a rank list that goes through. And so each of the programs will rank everybody that they have interviewed for this cycle. And then as the applicant, you rank all of the programs that you have interviewed at. And there is an algorithm that goes into place that matches a program with an applicant. And actually, the algorithm favors the applicant. So we do want to make sure that applicants know that they have a little bit of a benefit there, but it is something that is matched up. So you find out in about mid-March after applying in September for the cycle coming, and where you have been chosen by which program to complete your residency training. And so after you match and have this wonderful excitement, you then go and train starting in about July or so for your specialty.
Yeah, awesome. So I think it's important to emphasize, that the match does favor applicants. That said, with metrics disappearing, meaning step one, which used to be a huge benchmark for program directors in deciding whom to interview, it is becoming a bit more strategic, in terms of what applicants have to do in order to get a match. And there are other changes that have happened in the past few years and things that are upcoming for the coming year that we're going to be discussing today, as well as in our next episode about the residency match. So I think that's a great, sort of foundation. So let's kind of talk about next day one of medical school. And when we get this question from applicants a lot, I'm a first year med student, I'm starting med school in the summer, what do I need to be doing? What do I need to be thinking about starting day one? And I think we can kind of do a quick walkthrough of, maybe the preclinical years, and then on to the clinical years without going into too much, too much information, because obviously we could have entire episodes, which we will, about each steps of the process, right? So just kind of walk us through sort of how you advise students, what you think they should sort of be thinking about when they enter medical school, realizing that, yes, are there some students who start medical school and they know what specialty they want to pursue? Yes, there are some of those. But I would say probably among the students we work with, the majority when they start med school, they don't really know what specialty they want to pursue. So kind of keeping that in mind, how should students be approaching their medical school years to ensure that they are going to be competitive when it's time for them to apply to residency?
Absolutely. I think you have to start day one in order to start your journey. And you only have so many years within medical school to also then apply, right? So your first 3 clinical years, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of studying. There's a lot of things that you have to do there in order to academically succeed. However, most students don't go in with a specialty that they know. They might know, I want to do primary care potentially, or I might want to do a surgical specialty. But there is a sense of figuring that out there, an exploration. And so you want to start observing, you want to start reaching out to different faculty, to upper level medical students, M3s, M4s, to residents, to start observing, to shadow, to see what they are like in real time. You want to go to these rotations and spend a day, see what you think. And it's a little bit different than when you were shadowing as an undergraduate, because as a medical student, you're able to be a lot more interactive. You're able to be taken a little bit more seriously, since this is where you want to be in terms of they know you're going to be a physician. They might want you to come into their specialty. So they're going to be a little bit more interactive in that way. So mentorship is really important. So starting to make those connections with the faculty and other medical educators and students. That is really important.
I just want to talk a little bit about metrics, and we look a lot at metrics. We look a lot at the NRMP data, the National Residency Matching Program, which is sort of the umbrella organization that through which the match takes place. ERS, the Electronic Residency Application Service, is the application. Those two sort of work together. But it used to be, again, that we had more metrics to look at. We had the step 1 score, which went pass fail. We even had grades in the preclinical years. And now with most medical schools having at least those first 2 years being pass-fail, and we've even heard that some schools are moving towards pass-fail rotations. That hasn't been confirmed. But as there are fewer metrics that programs can use, there actually have been some publications, and again, I can reference these in the show notes as well. There have been some publications, where students have given feedback that this hasn't decreased their stress. And in fact, step 1 failure rates have increased because it's pass-fail. I think that just because that students aren't going to take things as seriously, and I think, if things are pass-fail. But students don't feel, and again, this is based on real publications, they don't feel that this has decreased their stress. They feel like it's just shifted the stress, right? Because now students are feeling pressured to figure out other ways to set themselves apart, right? So that's sort of the student perspective. From a program director perspective, what would you say program directors are now focusing on more, in order to really figure out which students are going to be the most competitive for their residency programs, and not just metrics, but also in terms of fit? Like how is all of this kind of coming into play, now that we don't have those objective metrics as much?
Exactly. I think one of the number one things is letters of recommendation. That is a huge factor in how they can separate some of these students in terms of, if all of these things are pass-fail, how do we know which students are excelling and engaging and how not? So one of them is through letters of recommendation, and which letters are going to be very personal, that are going to kind of say the student is in the top. This is one of the top students I've ever worked with. This student has gone above and beyond. This student is somebody that I would want in my program. Things like that are very important in these letters. Also in the clinical rotations, in the MSPE, those comments are very important. So even if it's pass-fail, there's a comment section. And, they are going to be positive for the most part. Obviously, red flags, they would tag those. But, everyone's going to have positive-ish. You want faculty members that are going to gush about you in those, that are going to state all of the things you actually did. So you want those to be more robust than just this person showed up on time. They knew what they were doing. They were prepared. They spoke to the patients kindly. They, worked well with others. That's very basic. We need more. The more detail, the better in those MSPE. That is important. So letters of recommendation, MSPEs are very important.
Just explain, just because again, we've varying degrees of knowledge among our listeners. Explain what the MSPE is. When do students get this?
Sure.
If you could talk a little bit about that final sentence that we always talk about as well, where they rank students essentially. Just explain a little bit about what the MSPE is and why that's significant. And even that there's some people that think the MSPE should go away, right? Because part of it is authored by the students, right? Which we assist students when in writing their key characteristics for their MSPE.
Right.
So if you could just talk a little bit about that would be great.
Yes. So the MSPE is an evaluation that all schools have to provide for your application through ERAS to the programs. And so this is done by the school. The students do assist with this, and some of them do get to view this. But what it is it's a come together of all of your data for basically, instead of giving all of your grades, they have sections. So they say, okay, here's your clinical work, the grades for preclinical, you've passed, they did well. There's no red flags. They didn't have to repeat anything. So this is just the preclinical years. It's very basic there. They also note these 3 noteworthy characteristics, which I think helps out for the programs on a program level. We would view these as the highlights, right? What are the most important things about the student that we should know? So obviously they're going to go through the entire ERAS about your experiences, but these are almost like your top 3. What's the most exciting things about you? And so it gives a little window into that. And sometimes I think those are, very basic. Everyone's like, okay, you did some research, you did this, but sometimes there's something notable in there that excites a program director or catches somebody's eye, right? Like they had an experience that they wanted to note, or they were an NCAA athlete in college, or they were part of the Peace Corps, or they created their own business, something, that we wouldn't really know that catches your eye. I think that's where those 3 noteworthies come into play that are exciting. And that can help program directors kind of say, oh, wow, let me look at this student. Let me see what's going on with them. So that's in there as well. Then they go into the clinical rotation. So each clinical rotation in your 3rd year is going to have a grade. So typically it's pass, fail, honors. Sometimes there's some things in between there, but that's where we as a program would see, how did you do in that rotation? That's really where in the MSPE, the biggest chunk of time that the programs that's what we're looking at. We see that you passed all of your preclinical things, wonderful, nothing big there. We want to see how you did in your rotations. Were you engaged? Did you did you come early? Did you stay late? Were you a great team leader? Were you somebody who they could count on? Did you do anything that was a little bit more above and beyond? How did you interact with everybody? And you can tell as a program, right? So because the programs also write these for our own students, right? For the medical students that come through ours. So if we were in surgery, we would know how to write these. Most of them are going to be positive, but you can tell what's more positive. And the program directors know how things are written. So everything's going to be pretty much positive, but it can go above and beyond. So those comments are very interesting to programs, especially ones that are what you're applying for. So if you're applying for surgery, they want to see how you did in your surgery. Were you somebody who was always going in the OR? Were you somebody that was very engaged? Were you somebody that, like I said, stayed late, went in early? Those are important factors for surgery. How did you do in your internal medicine? That's also important. Those are big rotations, right? Those are ones where there's a lot of knowledge to understand. There's a lot of patients. You're in charge of a lot of patients on those rotations. How did you fare with that? How did you do with your time management? They want to know those things. So we're looking at those grades and those comments for each of those rotations. And then you'll have things like your internship. How did you do with a higher autonomy, right? How did you do in something where it was almost like a in between an intern and a 4th-year medical student, those sub-Is. How did you do in those sub-internship ones where your level of autonomy and level of leadership was a little bit more? We want to know that. So those are very important. And that, I think, is a indicator of another metric where we're looking at the grades, right? We're looking at somebody who might have gotten a pass in surgery, and then we might look at someone who honored in surgery. And the level of, okay, why did this person honors and this person pass, right? It's not always a detrimental if you didn't honor, but what were the comments for that? Why did this person who honored, why were they way above? Was it just their shelf score that put them there? Or was it these comments of, this is a person you have to have in your residency because of what kind of work ethic they have? So those are really important. On the last thing of the MSPE, is they have usually schools will rank you in terms of quartiles. Typically, it's usually quartiles. So are you in the first quartile, second, third, fourth quartile, depending on the school is how they do that. But what you want to be is in the highest quartile. That means that they have you have the highest recommendation. So sometimes they do that. Highest recommended, lower recommended. You want to be in that top half, basically. Okay. If they're saying these are these students are highly sought after. These are our top students that we think, are going to be most successful.
So let's just sort of talk about some terminology that you referenced, which is very important, just so, people understand. So generally speaking, for schools, especially that have 4-year curriculums, in the 3rd year, you're doing core rotations in surgery, internal medicine, pediatrics, psychiatry, OBGYN, family medicine, and, some may have others. I don't know if I missed any big ones there. And then typically in each of those rotations, you're going to have something called a shelf exam, which is the portion of step 2. So the USMLE, those are your licensing exam. USMLE step 1 is pass fail and is usually taken at the end of your 2nd year. USMLE step 2 is a 3-digit score that's taken at the end of your 3rd year. And you are going to have the portion of the content, that would be on that exam for that specialty. And you take that typically at the end of your core rotation in all those disciplines. And that is factored into your grade. Then once you transition to your 4th year, you're doing things called sub-internships, which is when you are given an increasing level of responsibility within your sub-internship. Most students are going to be doing sub-internships in the specialty that they want to, to ultimately apply for. And so there's obviously some strategy in when you schedule those sub-internships and then there's something called away rotations, which we can talk about in a little while. There are a lot of topics here to cover, but that sort of is the basic, but certainly the beginning of medical school is about figuring out what specialty you want to pursue. And this is why we definitely encourage students to continue shadowing, because not everyone knows, and you're going to have somewhat limited exposure during your core rotations. You're not going to get a lot of exposure to those subspecialties. And then it's about sort of building relationships and establishing your reputation so that you can get great letters of recommendation, keeping in mind that your letters of recommendation are not coming from your clinical faculty. They're coming from your core rotations. They're coming from those sub-Is. And in terms of grading, I think it's important to mention that students are typically graded in their clinical rotations, and it's honors. It's going to be high pass, sometimes low pass, and fail. It is extremely rare for a student to fail a rotation. There has to be something fairly egregious for a student to fail a rotation. That is a huge red flag. So in things that, in specialties you're really interested in that you want to apply for, your goal is to get honors in those rotations. So I think those are just some things that, we want to kind of make clear. Now, let's just kind of move on, from, again, with fewer things to set students apart. Students are feeling more pressured to get more involved in activities in a similar way that they did as pre-meds. So if we had to kind of give students some ideas of things that they could be involved with as medical students that would help them to sort of set themselves apart, and things that are also important to program directors, based on the program director survey, that is done. I think it's every other year, but I think it's going to start to be every year now, I believe, and I can link to that also in our show notes. But talk about, obviously clinical, we talked about clinical performance, doing well in sub-internships, doing well in away rotations. That's a whole other topic, but doing well in those clinical, when you're working clinically, that is obviously, I'd say, number one most important. But now again, because students need ways to kind of set themselves apart, additionally, what are some ways that they can do that? What activities can they get involved with? And how much do those activities need to relate to the specialty that they want to pursue?
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that students get very caught up on are the typical things like interest groups and student groups. And they're like, oh, well, I'm the president of the internal medicine student group. And that's wonderful. I think those are great opportunities. But there are so many other great leadership opportunities within your medical school. And one of my favorite things is getting involved in the actual school. So this is getting on a curriculum committee, building curriculum for medical school, right? That they need student feedback for that. Giving tours to other students that are prospective students. That's a great leadership role. Also being part of the CME, the GME committees, being on the education committee team. I mean, these are amazing ways that you can show that you are involved in your school
Hmm.
And what that does is shows that you are going to then be involved in their residency. So residency program directors want residents that have a voice, that want to be involved, that want to give feedback, that are interactive, right? That are involved in the residency, that aren't just there to just get trained and then move on. They want people that are going to leave a mark, that want to be a part of it. And how you show that is, I was a part of my medical school. I made it better, right? I was a leader within that. And I think that is one of the most important things that you can do to show leadership, is just be involved in the actual school, the administrative part of that. The other thing I really like is outside community service. And I know, and when I tell my students this, they're like, another thing to do outside of all the things that I'm doing. And I said, I know, it seems insane. But what it does is it helps you continue to build the narrative of populations that you're passionate about working with. So let's say you're interested in pediatrics, right? And you do your pediatric rotation, core rotation. You do a sub-I in pediatrics. You're part of the pediatric interest group. That's wonderful. But I want to know how you interact with kids. I want to know how you've been a mentor. I want to know that you've been a coach for Girls on the Run. I want to know that you've been a big brother, big sister. I want to know that you've gone out into the community and worked with children. That is building more of a narrative that is proving to me you actually can have relationships with children and their parents, and outside of just what is wrong with them diagnostically, right? That's important. And that builds an extra narrative. So the community work is very important. I think it gets lost because it's just one more thing, it feels like, but it helps to show passions, specifically even like psychiatry. I think this is a great specialty to show this, because you can work within psychiatry in particular populations and showcase that within the community, right? With addiction, with eating disorders, with crisis hotline. There's so many ways that you can go out and help the community. And as a physician, that's part of your job too, is to be in the community, helping and being a part of that. That's part of your job, as your career. So I think that's an important piece that is not talked about enough there. So it would be obviously the leadership piece and being a part of more of the administrative part of the school, having the community service piece. I think that's, really important. And lastly, I know this sounds, again, how am I supposed to have hobbies when I'm in medical school?
Yeah.
But that is something program directors look at, and very specifically in certain specialties. I know my program director for surgery, he always looked at the hobbies and interests.
Yeah.
And that was sometimes something that he was like, okay, I see a girl that came in with weightlifting and crocheting. He's like, I got to meet this girl who weightlifts and also crochets. Like it's a dichotomy. And there's the interest of hobbies and what you do outside of your school and work is important. How do you relate to others? What can you bring to a patient room that you can relate to them, relate to other people within the residency, to your other fellow residents, your peers? Are you a person that can have other stories other than just, what do you know about surgery? And that was a huge part of how we built our class, was how do these people fit together? What are their interests? How are they going to fit in with everybody else? So you have to have hobbies and interests and be somebody that can talk about things that are non-medical.
Yes, certainly. I just want to sort of mention, when it comes to community service, I agree this is this is so important. And, a lot of medical schools have free clinics. That is a very, I'd say, popular and meaningful way to get involved in community service. I think it's also important to mention that it's great if your community service relates to your specialty, as, and Sydney mentioned a few of those things. That isn't always possible, right? Because you're going to have the most time to get involved in community service in your first 2 years, when you're probably still figuring out what specialty you want to pursue. So don't sort of hold off getting involved because, you don't know what you want to do yet. You very well may, have to get deeply involved before you've made that decision. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention was, in addition to leadership, and I agree, getting involved in, in school committees is really important, and hobbies are important too. I mean, when we used to evaluate applicants, I mean, these were fairly informal sessions for us. I mean, honestly, we would all gather after we interviewed all applicants, and we would talk about them very openly. And so if someone really sort of piques somebody's interest, like, oh my gosh, this person's like so cool, they did blah blah blah, they did blah blah blah, that definitely came up. And I think it's also important to understand, and we're not going to go into interviews, but interviews are not scripted. When I used to interview people, I used to have like a question I would ask every season, that just to mix it up. Like there was one season I asked students to, teach me something, just because I wanted to see. I mean, someone taught me how to hula hoop. They didn't bring the prop with them. This was when all interviews were in person. I do think hobbies are important. And something else that, I think we must bring up, which, is going to be a big topic for our next episode about the residency, which is going to build on this one, is research and scholarly work. And certainly, there's been a lot of talk lately about research and, students just kind of collecting publications, not necessarily meaningful publications. And so, talk to me a little bit about when students should get involved in research. If, let's say, they have an initial specialty interest, they get involved in a research project related to that specialty, and then they change their minds, like, because that we see often, I would say, is that going to be harmful? Talk to me a little bit about, research and scholarly work and the importance for the residency match process. And also how, to a degree, that's also going to depend on the specific specialty and all of that kind of good information.
Yes, research is very important. And I do like to talk to students about the research, because a lot of the time you think, oh, I have to do it in a specific specialty. I have to do more clinical research, and research is across the board. So there is a lot of different research you could get involved in. So let's say you really have no idea what specialty you want to do. You love everything. A great research is QI projects. So quality improvement, quality assurance projects. Those are wonderful. Medical education research is also wonderful to get involved in. So if you're really not sure, those are two great opportunities to get involved in research in your first 2 years if you're just unsure of the specialty. Now, if you're thinking about a couple of different specialties, that is okay. You can do research in something like, let's say, in medicine, in internal medicine, something within there, and then all of a sudden switch and say, oh gosh, I went to my psychiatry and rotation, I just loved it. And I haven't done psychiatry research. That's okay. Research is research. It's showing productivity. It's showing that you can look at something in depth, that you have intellectual curiosity. So it doesn't have to be right off the bat within your specialty. So getting involved in a project is really important. And I think one of the things why I said in the beginning to communicate and start making connections with residents, with medical students, with faculty, that's a lot of the time how you get these research opportunities, is that fourth year, third year medical students or residents are doing projects. It's required by all residencies through the governing body, ACGME, to do a research project. They have to in order every year. So they need help on those. So usually they recruit medical students to help them on these projects. So does faculty. And then M4s, M3s, they're doing those. They also need help. They need people to help with data. They need people to help with things. So they then recruit M1 and M2s. That's how you build the relationships and get on a lot of these projects, is really just those building of connections and ask, hey, do you guys need help on these projects? I'm interested in this, but it's okay that it's outside of your specialty. Once you do know, though, it is important to try to look for projects within the specialty that you want to pursue, especially if you are in your third year and you have made your decision. There are projects that you can definitely get on. And again, they don't have to be this massive project, but it is important to continue that in there. And now we are going to touch upon the new breakdown of the scholarly works. But I think research in general is very important to show that you want to further the specialty. You want to further medical knowledge. You want to innovate. You're curious. Those are key aspects that you need to show. And so you have to show them in some way. But like I said, it doesn't have to be in a specialty. It can be quality improvement projects. It can be medical education. It can be a lot of different things that are going on. There's so much research going on. So you can hop on projects really midway through any point. And it depends. If you're not somebody who is extremely excited about research, you're just much clinically, you just are like that. I just like patient care. I like getting in there. Mm-hmm. I'm more of a community service kind of person, and that's fine. But you do need to find projects then that are going to be interesting to you. And so that's why I think you can be selective of those. It's okay to not love research fully, but you need to show some sort of research mind.
Yeah. And I think it's important to sort of mention when getting involved in research, it also depends on the specialty. I mean, the more competitive specialties, so let's think like ortho, ENT, ophtho, dermatology, plastic surgery. Research is going to be more important for the more competitive specialties. It's also going to be more important for the more competitive programs within specialties. So when deciding what to get involved with, and all of this data exists through the NRMP, through their data and reports, and I can link that in the show notes. I mean, there's so much data to sift through, right? Because we have data for every specialty. We have data for every type of applicant, and that's a whole other separate podcast, whether you're a US MD, allopathic student, a US osteopathic student, or either a U.S. citizen, international medical student, or a non-U.S. citizen, international medical student or graduate. And those are the four major categories. And the data is very, very different for all those four subtypes, and everything is now broken into those four subtypes. So when you're looking at, do I need research? How much research do I need? And, and there's also data that shows what the average number of research output is for different specialties. And again, the changes we're going to be talking about in the next episode, that emphasis is going to be changing. Thank goodness. So people aren't just collecting, research opportunities and trying to output as much as possible and not really considering the quality. But you do have to think about your goals when you're deciding what research to get involved with and if you should be involved in research and how much. There are even some students who are taking full years to do research, right? In the most competitive specialties in order, to really demonstrate, the scholarly excellence and to show that they're scientifically minded and, to demonstrate the competencies that their specialty might be seeking. So I think that's really important. So, if we sort of look at like the takeaways of what's important, to me, a lot of this still is going back to the step one, becoming pass-fail, and to curriculums becoming pass-fail. Essentially, the first 2 years of medical school don't literally do nothing to set you up to be a competitive residency applicant. So it all then is for the clinical years in medical school when you are hopefully getting grades and when you hopefully will have the opportunity to really prove yourself, when you're going to get that step 2 score, when you are able to, really demonstrate your excellence on those clinical rotations. And then it's going to be through your letters of recommendation. That's why we talked a lot about letters of recommendation. And then through your extracurricular activities. So, and we'll talk more about, I guess we can talk about letters of recommendation just very quickly, since I think it's a really important topic and super important when we're looking at what makes an applicant competitive. Keeping in mind that at least for now, you're only allowed 4 letters of recommendation, right? When you're applying for residency. If you have really important research and that's important to you and that's important to your specialty, we do recommend that you get a letter of recommendation from your principal investigator. But then beyond that, Sydney, what other letters of recommendation are we generally recommending students try to get, in order to be competitive?
So typically most schools will require you, and the programs are requiring either a chairman letter or a program director letter from your home program. So this is going to come standard at your medical school. They're going to have the person that typically writes it. So depending on the specialty will depend on who writes that letter for you. And so you'll meet with them and talk to them about what you want to do and why, and they'll write that. And it's going to be a little bit more of a summary type letter, but that's going to be a required letter. So there's one down, right? That's through your school. The other letters, like I said, I think a PI letter for your principal investigator, if you have significant research, I think is a great letter to have. The other letters need to come from faculty. Most students will have both of those letters from their home program, and those can come from the specialty that you're applying for. Most of the time, you'll want them if you're applying for surgery or family. You'll want those from that specialty, and you can get that. Usually, one can come from your core rotation, and then the other one should come from your sub-internship. So it can show graduate level of responsibility and how you did in each of those. And the sub-internship is usually towards the beginning of your fourth year. So that's, a great letter. Some students will get, if let's say you don't have ophthalmology at your school, you might do an away rotation somewhere. That would be a great letter to get then for ophthalmology. And then maybe you have a surgery core letter that would also correlate to ophthalmology since you're talking about surgery, but then you have an away rotation. And those letters are sometimes really great if you are wanting to go to that particular program. You get a letter from them, from one of their faculty members, basically backing you. That can be a great letter. You don't have to have that. Your home program, if you have that specialty there, is perfectly fine to get strong letters. But the key is to get the faculty letters. It has to be a faculty member, right? So a lot of students are like, well, my chief resident was there most of the time. It can't be a resident. It has to be a faculty member. It can be a junior faculty member. That's okay. As long as that junior faculty member really knows you well, right? It doesn't have to be the director of that particular program. It doesn't, of that specialty. It doesn't have to be the top faculty member there. It doesn't have to be senior. It can be junior, but it has to be faculty. I get that question a lot because students work a lot with residents. Now, the residents can give feedback too. What I usually tell the student is, tell the resident, can you please help the faculty member by giving your 2 cents, by giving your feedback on how I did, so that they can then use that in the letter if you worked mainly with a resident. But it won't be effective if you have a resident letter. It has to be faculty.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's great advice. I think it's also important to mention that not every letter has to be sent to every program. So like if you do get that letter from a specific program and you don't want that going to all of your programs, like you can use that as one of your 4 letters just for that program. So you can assign it. Let's just talk a little bit about away electives, just because, again, I think in the current landscape, those were always important. But let's talk a little bit about the importance of away electives, what away electives are, right? Some people may not even know that if they're very early on, why those are important, when you should do those strategically. So, you're really poised to do the best, performing on someone else's turf. And also like potential pitfalls in doing an away elective. I think it's important to mention that too.
Away electives weren't required usually for most programs. You could go to your home program and do all of your rotations there. I think they're becoming a lot more popular in almost every single specialty. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but basically, away rotation is when you do a clinical rotation away from your home program. So it is at a different school, a different program than where you go to medical school. And you apply through VSLO. So that is the VSLO. That is the application service that most schools will use in order to be accepted into an away rotation. So you have to apply to these. They're not just guaranteed just because you say, oh, I want to go do a away rotation and surgery at Michigan. You can't just do that, right? You have to apply, and there's everybody in the country is applying to these. So it is a very important application to do. Usually you will start to look at your fourth year schedule in the second half of your third year. You will get that schedule of when your other sub-Is and things for your home program are. So why that's important is because you have to fit in the away rotation in your off months. So in your fourth year, you'll have some free months, basically, where you can put in either research, an away rotation, an extra elective, things like that you don't have as many core rotations in your fourth year. So when you're in your second half of your third year, you're going to start choosing those. This is also when you start applying for those aways to fill in those gaps. And so typically that's January, February, March, April, that's late winter, early spring is when VSLO opens and you are able to see what is available. So remember, this is the hardest part, I think, about this entire process, is that your school does this certain schedule, and they're going to give you certain weeks and certain months. Now, other programs do it differently, and they have other weeks and things. So you have to also see what's going to match up, what's going to work for your schedule, and apply for those specific times and months. So when I talk to students about applying for away rotations, they're like, well, I want these ones, these two. One, you might not get accepted to those. And two, they might not fit into what your school has then allowed you to do. So you want to apply to a good number of these. I usually say if you have, let's say, one away rotation that you're doing, and you only have 2 months that are options for you, like a July and an October, I would apply to 5 to 6 away rotations for just those 2 months, because it may be that you have to somehow, do a week here or 2 weeks in here, or it might not work for your 4 weeks. It just depends. So you want to give yourself options, a more probability to be accepted, more probability that you will actually get the month you need, right? And it's all a process. And also some of these VSLO applications are almost like a little mini residency application. You have to put in a personal statement. Yes. Why do you want to pursue this specialty, and why do you want to come here? Why is this particular away rotation interesting to you? Yep. And you have to provide a CV. You have to have letters of recommendation. It's a big process. You do not want to start this in April when you're trying to just get it in. This is something that you should be thinking about in the beginning of your third year. As you get to the second half, you want to already know which ones you want to apply to. You want to have looked to see what they're going to require of you. You're going to want to have a personal statement draft. You're going to want to have all these things getting ready. You're going to want to ask your faculty for a letter. Like, these are things you have to prepare in this late winter type to apply, because usually they open February, March, and then some even later, depending on when the months are. So if they open, this particular program does their aways in November, they might not open their VSLO until April or May even, depending. Right. So it's staggered. It's constant. You're kind of changing things as you go, but it is a process to really be organized and prepared for these away rotations. Now, I like away rotations because it allows students to break out of these regional cycles. So let's say you go to medical school in the Northeast or the Southeast. Those are very regionalized, right? So most students that go to the Southeast schools are going to apply for residencies within the Southeast. They're, very tight knit there. And they and those programs are going to interview students from that area. Because they know they're going to stay there. They want to, continue their practice there, their future. Let's say you're from Boston. You want to go to Emory. You want to break into that Southeast area, but you have no ties there. They're like, why would somebody from Boston want to come all the way down here? Yeah. That's a great opportunity for an away to showcase yourself. Hey, I want to come here. I love this program. I'm ready to move here. and you showcase yourself to them as somebody who is definitely interested. You've taken the time to do an away there and show yourself. Pitfalls to those is you go to these away rotations and you don't jive with them. You don't click, or you're tired. Something comes up where you're missing a few days. And, when you don't perform up to the level that you really want, that high level, is where they're like, oh, well, this person was not up to our caliber, or they didn't seem engaged in what we were doing, or you're very nervous and you hold back. You don't, engage and try to, talk to people, make connections. You're kind of nervous and you're a little bit more introverted. And that's not always, it's not a negative per se, but it can show that you're not interested. It's that interest. So they then have a negative persona of why you're here, or if you really even want to be here. Right. So that's a negative. But I find that most students that pursue aways and work, it's a big process to go to an away. Some of those students are going to have a good experience and they're going to put forth the best effort. And just as a tip, I always say, right when you get to your away rotation, schedule a meeting for towards the end of your rotation with the program director. 15 minutes. Just go to the program coordinator, say, hey, I'm here for my, away rotation. Can I get on the calendar for this week with the program director before I leave? Always have a face-to-face with the program director before you leave that away, because they're going to remember the face. You might never see them during your rotation. Right. And that's normal, because you're working with the residents, you're working with faculty, but you want them to see, and you want to just say, hey, this is me. I'm excited about your program. I'm going to be applying here. I really loved my time. These were the highlights for me. Here's my CV. Just wanted to let you know that I'll be applying in a few months. That way they have a face-to-face with you, and they will remember you when you apply. Even though, a lot of students will get that interview, you want to still have that one-on-one time, even if it's 10 minutes. That's all you need. So make sure you schedule that at the beginning so you get on their calendar.
Right. Yeah, no, a lot of great information. You said some things that just sort of, that I took notes that made me think of things. Definitely, I can tell you when we had our meetings, when we were ranking applicants, if there was someone who rotated with us and there was a weird interaction with somebody, or someone just didn't, a lot of this, I think, is important to mention, is about fit with the program, right? When programs are evaluating applicants, when they're meeting you, when you're rotating with them, they're evaluating you for fit with them. They want to say to themselves, am I going to be happy when I am working at 2 a.m. with this person, or am I going to be annoyed? So it comes down, a lot of it comes down to fit. Something I wanted to mention about timing was, sometimes, you want to do your first sub-I at your home institution because you want to go into these away rotations as confident as you can be, because they're going to cut you less slack as a visiting student. Keep in mind that you can do away rotations in September, October, even potentially November, because sometimes when you do them in the summer months, keep in mind there are other visiting students there, there are other home students there, and it can get pretty competitive. Okay, so sometimes going in less popular months when there aren't going to be a lot of visiting students is going to give you more of an opportunity to kind of stand out, and also to really, sort of not feel that competition and allow you to really be yourself.
I just wanted to note, Jessica, about that time frame. I actually love the fall months for aways, and what I call them is promotion. So that it's not for a letter, it's for promoting. Right. So people that are going to go during interview season to the program director and say, this person needs to come. Yes. We need to interview this person. Yes. I loved working with them. And those promoters are almost just as important as your letter writers. So don't be afraid to go during interview season. And you can still get interviews all the way through December, January, February. So you want to, you can showcase yourself and just have them promote you, not with a letter, but just go directly to the program director on your behalf.
And even when we had residents, come to us and say, gosh, I really liked this person and they are great. I think they'd be a great fit. They even went out with us last night. Of course, you want to be careful with that. That's a whole other topic. But we took our residents' opinions quite seriously. So, you want to treat everybody on a away rotation as someone who is impacting your future. You sort of never want to let your guard down. You never want to get too informal because, yes, we definitely listened to what our residents had to say when it came to our visiting students. Definitely. So I think that that's really important. I think this is really helpful. Okay, so I think that if there's sort of is a key takeaway from today's session, it's that your competitiveness, your candidacy is built over time. It's about relationship building. It's about experience building. It's about nurturing your skills and your attributes. And so it isn't something that happens overnight. It happens over literally 3 years of medical school. And it's something that you sort of never should take your foot off the gas, from sort of paying attention to. And obviously, your third year becomes the most important when it comes to those letters of recommendation, those endorsements, and then your away rotations and your sub-internships are very important in terms of the scholarly work. A lot of that, the bulk of it's going to be started in your preclinical years, but obviously you can also continue some of that into your clerkship year, your third year, your fourth year, but those schedules are going to be much more demanding. You're going to, have calls, you're going to be waking up early. So there isn't necessarily going to be as much time in order to sort of develop those outside interests and those outside endeavors. So I think this was a great episode to, kind of really, create that foundation that we wanted to create for everyone so people understand. In our next episode about the residency process, we're shifting a bit to how you've built your profile. Now, how are you going to present it? We're going to be talking about some really key changes that are taking place in the residency application process and that have recently taken place, as well as some resources that exist for you. So I think that'll be just as informative. And Sydney, thank you so much for being here and taking the time to do this. And we will see you on our residency episode, the next one. And you can, all of those resources that I referenced will be in the show notes, and you can find them down below in the show notes. So thank you so much, Sydney.
Thank you for having me.